Picture this. America in the 1920s. It's a nation just wrestling with itself. You've got the Charleston, cars becoming common, all that energy.
Yeah, smashing right into these really deep-rooted traditions, and there's this real unease about where everything's headed.
Exactly. It's not just the Roaring Twenties you see in the movies.
Yeah.
It was a time of really profound, sometimes kind of jarring transformation.
Right. Forget the simple flappers and jazz bands image for a second. We're diving into the core shifts that really defined the decade.
We'll be looking at the clashing political views, the intense arguments about what American even meant.
The explosion of this whole new consumer culture and, the huge changes in just how people live day to day.
And we've got some great material to guide us, stuff that really digs into the complexities. Our mission for you, listener, is to get a clear, sort of nuanced feel for the big forces at play.
See it not just as some glamorous past, but a pivotal time that honestly still echoes today.
Okay, so where do we even start unpacking all this? It feels huge.
Well, a logical place is probably the political landscape. It wasn't just one thing. It was a really diverse mix of ideas.
Okay.
So on one end, you had what people saw as radical views, socialists, communists, pushing for pretty fundamental changes.
Right.
Then you had the conservatives, mostly focused on keeping the economic and social structure as it was, often very pro-business.
And then you mentioned reactionaries. What exactly were they reacting against? Were they a big force?
The reactionaries. They were really looking backwards, yearning for this sort of idealized past. Often that meant traditional hierarchies, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant ideals, that kind of thing.
They felt threatened by all the change, the new people, new ideas.
Definitely. And rounding it out were the liberals, drawing from the progressive movement, trying to reform the system to deal with all this rapid change.
And it's important, like our sources show with Eugene Debs running for president, that these labels weren't just about goals, but methods too, right?
Exactly. Debs was a socialist, aiming for radical change, but he was still, working within the democratic system.
Okay, now this period also sees this big push for Americanism. And tied up with that, this massive wave of fear, the Red Scare. What was fueling that?
The Red Scare, yeah. It was mainly this deep fear of radical ideas, especially Bolshevism after the Russian Revolution in 1917. It tapped into existing worries about social chaos, about foreigners.
But the reaction seems almost out of proportion to the actual number.
That's what's striking. I mean, yeah, small communist parties formed, but maybe 70,000 members total, hardly a revolution brewing. But it got massively amplified by that leftover anti-foreigner feeling from World War I, which kind of morphed into suspicion of anyone seen as radical.
And it wasn't just an abstract fear. 1919 saw the Great Unrest, millions of workers striking. What were the big issues there?
Several things kind of came together. Wartime inflation had hammered workers' paychecks.
Yeah.
A lot of them felt the deals they'd made during the war were being ignored by employers now.
Yeah.
Plus a big push for unions, which owners fought hard against.
And the soldiers coming home,
Yeah.
they walked into a tough situation too.
Yeah, imagine coming back to find food prices doubled, clothes nearly tripled. It must have felt like a betrayal.
And it sounds like many Americans just automatically linked these strikes to the Red Scare, like it was all Bolshevik agitation.
Absolutely. You get quotes like that one from Billy Sunday, the evangelist, basically calling Bolsheviks diseased pests needing elimination. Really captures that intense, sometimes irrational fear.
And President Wilson was away for a lot of this, right, at Versailles.
He was, which maybe left a bit of a leadership vacuum just when things were getting tense domestically.
Then you have specific events, like the Seattle General Strike in January 19. Started with shipyard workers, but blew up bigger. What was so significant, so scary to some people?
Well, the Seattle strike was actually incredibly peaceful, really well organized. But just the scale of it, over 60,000 workers walking out together, that really spooked conservatives.
They saw it as, what, a European-style revolution starting.
Kind of. They feared it was socialism taking hold. The Seattle mayor calling for troops, boasting he crushed a Bolshevik uprising. It shows the anxiety, even though the strike was mostly about wages and conditions.
And labor wasn't just asking for more pay. There was this idea of industrial democracy. What did that actually mean?
Industrial democracy.
Yeah.
It is a broad term, really. Covered ideas like government ownership of railroads, workers having more say in management, profit sharing, things like that.
Pretty radical stuff for the time.
Seen as a major challenge to capitalism, yeah. Congress rejected those ideas pretty firmly.
Okay, then shortly after Seattle, the Boston police strike in September 19. Police striking.
Yeah.
Now that feels wild even now. What were their issues? And why did Coolidge's response hit such a nerve?
The Boston police. I mean, their pay was terrible, hours were long, no extra pay for things like parade duty. They wanted to unionize, but the city fought it.
And Coolidge just shut it down.
Governor Calvin Coolidge, yeah. His famous line, "No right to strike against the public safety." It played right into fears of chaos, made him look strong. Refusing to even talk to the AFL leader, Gompers just cemented that image.
And that propelled him nationally.
Big time. And when police strikes started happening elsewhere, it just heightened that sense of crisis. In the end, the Boston strikers were fired, replaced. A clear win for the authorities.
The unrest keeps rolling. The steel strike, also September 19, the AFL trying to organize unskilled workers, that was a big shift for them, wasn't it?
It was, trying to bring those largely immigrant, often really exploited workers into the fold. Their demands are pretty basic. 8-hour day, 6-day week, and the brutal 24-hour shifts, union recognition.
But the industry wasn't having it.
Nope. Leaders like Judge Gary of U.S. Steel just refused to negotiate, period. The strike got violent, often with company guards involved. Troops were called in.
And it failed.
Completely collapsed. It really signaled this hardening stance against labor unions.
Even the United Mine Workers, under John L. Lewis, struck in November 19. What about them?
Yeah, Lewis was a force. They wanted shorter hours, more pay. Attorney General Palmer, deep in his anti-radical crusade, got an injunction against them.
But they got something in the end.
They did, actually. An arbitration board gave them a decent wage increase, so a partial win for them, even as labor faced setbacks elsewhere.
Which brings us right to the Palmer raids. Attorney General Palmer seemed convinced there was this huge radical plot. What was going on?
Palmer. Yeah, he was genuinely fearful, maybe excessively so. And you had this backdrop of bomb scares unsettling, even though, they never figured out who actually set them off. Radicals got blamed immediately.
And there was other violence.
Some incidents, yeah, like servicemen attacking socialists on May Day, then actual bombings Wall Street, even Palmer's own house. It created this climate of fear he could use to justify going after radical seeds, even pushing loyalty oaths for teachers.
And his tactics were pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
Mass arrests, deportations.
Oh, yeah. The Palmer raids involved rounding up thousands of suspected radicals, November 19, then again in big coordinated raids, January 2nd, 1920.
With questionable legal grounds.
Often, yeah. Lots of arrests without warrants, people deported, sometimes even U.S. citizens. Reports suggest Mrs. Wilson, the president's secretary, were involved in naming names. Groups like the American Legion jumped in, too. Due process just seemed to go out the window.
How did the public react? Did people support this?
Well, initially there was some support, driven by that fear, but as the scale of it, the disregard for basic civil liberties, became clearer, a backlash started.
People got worried about government overreach.
Exactly. Concerns grew about abuse of power, violating the Constitution, things like prosecuting the IWW, kicking legally elected socialists out of the NY legislature. It made people uneasy.
So the Red Scare eventually faded.
By summer 1920, yeah. The big May Day uprisings Palmer predicted just didn't happen, and he lost a lot of credibility.
It sounds like conservatives really used the Red Scare to hammer the labor movement, though, painting unions as un-American.
Absolutely. They skillfully linked unions to radicalism, denouncing the closed shop where you had to be in the union as Sovietism in disguise.
And the timing with the 1921 recession didn't help labor either.
Right. That weakened their bargaining power. Plus, employers pushed their American plan, the open shop, no union required. AFL membership dropped significantly.
But ironically, wages actually went up a bit.
Yeah, real wages saw a slight increase by 22, strangely enough, despite the union setbacks.
Moving on, this prejudice wasn't just political. The Sacco and Vanzetti case.
Yeah.
2 Italian immigrants tried for murder in 1921. It just feels wrong from the start. Was prejudice a big factor?
Sacco and Vanzetti. It's a classic, tragic example of how prejudice can infect the justice system. First off, they were Italian immigrants in a very anti-immigrant time. That made them suspect right away.
And their politics.
They were also known atheists and anarchists, deeply unpopular beliefs linked with radicalism during the Red Scare. Plus, they dodged the draft. None of that legally relevant to murder, but it absolutely became central to the trial. Kind of unspoken.
And the actual evidence wasn't strong.
Pretty weak, circumstantial. Yet they were convicted. Many believed it was their background and beliefs, not the evidence, that sealed their fate.
And despite appeals, huge international protests, they were executed in 1927. The reaction was massive.
Huge global outrage. Protests everywhere. People saw it as class justice, ethnic prejudice, Big names like Einstein, George Bernard Shaw spoke out. It hit the Italian-American community incredibly hard.
Didn't Governor Dukakis vindicate them much later?
Decades later, yeah. 1977. Dukakis basically said their trial was unfair, acknowledged the prejudice.
And this same era sees the Ku Klux Klan come roaring back. We think of them in the South, but they spread much wider in the 20s.
Oh, yeah. The Klan's revival was complex. D.W. Griffith's 1915 film, Birth of a Nation, hugely popular, deeply racist, definitely helped romanticize the old Klan and fuel the new one.
But the 1920s Klan was different. Broader targets.
Very much so. Still violently anti-black, of course, but they added this whole nativist agenda. They went after immigrants, Catholics, Jews, pacifists, communists, internationalists, even people breaking social norms like evolutionists, bootleggers, birth control advocates, anyone not fitting their narrow, native, white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant ideal.
So millions of members, even outside the South.
Estimates go as high as 5 million at its peak. Big presence in the Southwest, North Central states too. It was an extremist, ultra-conservative backlash against diversity, against modernity itself.
What caused their decline? It seemed pretty rapid after that huge growth.
Internal rot, basically. Scandals exposed their hypocrisy. The big one was 1925. Indiana Klan leader David Stevenson convicted for brutally murdering a young woman.
That must have damaged their image.
Severely. He then implicated other officials, exposing corruption. Hard to claim you're protecting virtue when your leaders are murderers and embezzlers. Congress investigated their finances, too. Plus, their violence and hate were linked to things like the 1919 race riots, which alienated a lot of people.
This whole climate prejudice, fear of foreigners, it had a massive impact on immigration policy, too, didn't it? Closing the doors.
Absolutely. That anxiety about America changing, especially in rural areas feeling their values were eroding, led to major legal shifts. The 1921 Immigration Act was huge, first time setting actual limits, about 350,000 a year. And it started a quota system based on the 1910 census.
Which hit certain groups harder.
Immediately cut immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe way down. They were seen as less desirable.
And the 1924 National Origins Act tightened it even more. It sounds like it was designed to favor Northern Europeans.
It really was. Cut the total number again down to about 152,000, and crucially, it changed the quota baseline to the 1890 census.
Ah, so even fewer Southern Eastern Europeans counted back then.
Exactly. It drastically reduced their numbers, and it banned Asian immigration completely.
But not Canadians or Latin Americans.
No, they were exempt, which
Yeah.
is partly why you see a big increase in Mexican migration to the Southwest, filling labor needs. Then another act in 29 tweaked it again using the 1920 census.
And these quotas stuck around for a long time.
Until 1965. By 1931, incredibly, more people were leaving the U.S. than arriving. A total reversal.
Wow. Okay, so this social turmoil also created these amazing cultural clashes. The Scopes trial, Prohibition. Let's start with fundamentalism versus evolution. What was the core issue for them?
For fundamentalists, Darwin's evolution theory seemed like a direct attack on their literal reading of the Bible, especially Genesis. They felt it undermined faith, led to moral decay, particularly in young people.
So they tried to ban teaching it.
Yeah, push for laws at state and local levels. Tennessee's Butler Law was the famous one that led to the Scopes trial.
The Monkey Trial, 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee. A teacher on trial for teaching evolution. Became this huge spectacle, right?
Oh, a total media circus. It really symbolized that clash between traditional religion and modern science. You had huge figures involved. Clarence Darrow defending Scopes, William Jennings Bryan prosecuting, himself a leading fundamentalist.
So it felt like fundamentalism itself was on trial.
In many ways, yes. It got intense scrutiny, and it was broadcast on the radio. Millions listening in.
The big moment was Darrow cross-examining Bryan about the Bible, right? The 6 days of creation.
That was legendary. Darrow really hammered Bryan on literal interpretation, exposing how difficult it was to square with science. Like, how long were the days of creation? It highlighted the intellectual challenge for strict literalists.
But Scopes was still found guilty.
Technically, yes. Fined $100, though it was later overturned. But many felt Bryan's performance under Darrow's questioning was a kind of public setback for the movement. Still, fundamentalism remained a powerful force in many churches.
Okay, let's switch gears to Prohibition, the noble experiment. What was the thinking behind it? And why did it fail so spectacularly?
Prohibition, the 18th Amendment, 1919, was the peak of decades of temperance work. Supporters believed alcohol fueled poverty, crime, domestic abuse. Progressives saw it as boosting public health, morality.
Strong support from churches, women's groups.
Especially in the Midwest and South. And yeah, in the South, racial motivations were sometimes mixed in too. The Volstead Act laid out the enforcement rules.
But not everyone was on board.
Huge opposition, especially in big eastern cities with large immigrant populations who just had different cultural views on drinking.
And enforcement was a disaster. Just not enough support or resources.
A total nightmare. Widespread ignoring of the law. Not nearly enough agents to police it. Plus, loopholes everywhere. Doctors' prescriptions, industrial alcohol getting diverted.
And home brewing took off.
Massively. Estimates of 700 million gallons of homebrew in 1929 alone. You just couldn't stop it.
The most obvious result, though, was organized crime exploding. Gangsters like Capone.
Prohibition created this incredibly rich black market. Bootlegging became the bedrock for powerful crime syndicates. Al Capone built an empire. Gang violence soared as they fought over territory.
And bribery was rampant.
Police, public officials, corruption was widespread. And crime branched out. Prostitution, gambling. The underworld was making billions annually by the late 20s.
It also gave rise to speakeasies. These secret bars became popular, even changed social norms for women.
Yes, speakeasies popped up everywhere. And ironically, they became places where middle-class women could drink in public, often for the first time. That wasn't typical in old saloons.
Though the saloons closing probably hit working-class folks harder.
True, they couldn't always afford speakeasy prices. Ultimately, prohibition just bred disrespect for the law. It was finally repealed in 1933.
Okay, amidst all this social and cultural upheaval, the economy was booming, this glorification of business idea. It was almost like a religion.
It really was. Business leaders were heroes. You had books like Bruce Barton's The Man Nobody Knows painting Jesus as a top executive, and Coolidge saying, "The business of the American people is business." Material success felt like the ultimate goal.
And the numbers look good. Post-WWI strength, Mellon's tax cuts, credit becoming common.
Yeah, after a quick dip after the war, things took off. Industrial productivity shot up like 70% between 22 and 28. Wages hit record highs, electric power usage exploded, filling homes with new appliances.
Driven by new tech, electric motors, the assembly line.
Huge drivers of efficiency. And whole new industries sprang up: light metals, synthetics, movies, radio manufacturing, and of course the absolute giant, the auto industry, pulling along petroleum, steel, rubber, road building.
So innovation was key. And not just industry medicine improved, life expectancy went up. You see those iconic skyscrapers going up.
Symbols of progress, absolutely. The corporate world kept consolidating: 2 mergers, more wealth in fewer, bigger companies. Chain stores changing retail.
And the rise of the manager.
Yeah, the managerial revolution. More emphasis on professional, college-educated managers. Business schools grew. Layers of management appeared.
And one of the biggest shifts, the new white-collar worker. More office jobs than factory jobs for the first time.
A major turning point, driven by consumer products needing admin, sales, advertising. And this opened doors for women, particularly in skilled roles like typing, stenography, also teaching, clerical work, phone operators.
But many women, especially Black and immigrant women, were still stuck in domestic service.
Crucial point. Yes, the majority of the female workforce was still there.
And to sell all these new goods, advertising became huge. Not just informing, but persuading.
Exactly. Advertising became sophisticated, focused on creating desire, using psychology, imagery. Spending soared by the mid-20s. Even sports became big business Paris. Babe Ruth, Jack Dempsey, their images carefully crafted for huge payouts.
And behind the factory efficiency, there was scientific management,
Yeah.
Taylorism, optimizing every little movement.
That was the goal. Break down tasks, make them efficient. Auto industry loved it, but workers often hated it, felt just empowered managers, sometimes cut wages initially.
Which brings us to Henry Ford and the assembly line. Detroit, the auto capital, he really perfected it, didn't he?
Ford and Olds experimented early, but Ford scaled it up massively, cut production time and costs dramatically. By 29, Ford, GM, Chrysler, the big three dominated.
And he had that famous $5 day wage, recognizing workers as consumers.
A smart move, yeah. Though it came with strings attached, adopting his idea of thrifty habits. He offered good benefits for the time, hired inclusively, but was also known for being pretty autocratic.
But the efficiency was undeniable. Model Ts rolling off the line.
Incredible numbers, huge profits. The Model T was everywhere. But the work itself, tedious, repetitive. Some stories say workers were practically chained to the line.
The car's impact.
Yeah.
It's hard to overstate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Changed everything.
Absolutely transformative. Became the king industry, bigger than steel. employed millions directly and indirectly, boosted oil, rubber, glass, highways,
Improved living standards, but killed the railroads.
pretty much decimated them, revolutionized food transport, created leisure travel, gave women more independence, broke down rural isolation.
Though some rural areas lost people because of it.
True, led to bigger consolidated schools and churches, fueled suburban sprawl, caused a shocking number of traffic deaths, changed family dynamics, gave youth independence, even helped criminals escape faster.
In alongside the car, the airplane and radio were emerging too.
Right. Wright brothers in 1903, then WWI spurred development. By the 20s, passenger and airmail lines started. Lindbergh's 1927 flight made him a global hero.
Airplane shrinking the world, but also foreshadowing its military use.
At radio. From Marconi's wireless to KDK's first voice broadcast in 1920 announcing Harding's win, then national networks like NBC, CBS.
Huge impact. New industry, filling leisure time, creating a shared national culture.
Standardizing accents even. Popular shows like Amos and Andy, perfecting advertising, boosting sports, politicians reaching millions. News, music, it was everywhere.
And movies. From peep shows to the Great Train Robbery.
The birth of a nation, powerful, controversial, Hollywood becoming the center, silent stars like Chaplin Valentino. Then the talkies arrived with the jazz singer in 27, a revolution.
Movies just took over entertainment.
Eclipsed almost everything.
Yeah.
Huge weekly audiences, killed vaudeville, hurt live theater, a massive industry, creating stars bigger than politicians, shaping tastes, styles, even educating through newsreels. Tabloids, movie magazines followed.
All this change affected working conditions too. Shorter hours. Welfare capitalism.
Some progress, yeah. Work hours slowly reduced U.S. Steel, moving to 3 8-hour shifts as an example, and welfare capitalism companies offering benefits like paid vacation, healthcare, cafeterias.
Trying to head off unions.
Partly, yeah. Avoid strikes, build loyalty. Union membership did dip, but the fundamental problem often was wages not keeping up with prices, with productivity. Workers couldn't always afford the stuff they were making, and selling overseas was tough with trade barriers.
So this dynamic economy sets the stage for big social shifts. The 1920 census showing a majority urban population for the first time is huge, and this connects to the perceived sexual revolution, linked to Freud.
Yeah, a kind of simplified Freudian idea took hold that repressing sexual desire was bad for you, led to more emphasis on sexual expression, liberation, especially among city dwellers, middle class, students.
That played out in the Jazz Age behavior. More drinking, new dances, fashion changes.
Definitely. More open mingling, drinking, dances like the Charleston seen as very provocative. Fashion got looser, thinner clothes, boyish looks, sleeveless dresses, shorter skirts, the whole flapper image.
And challenging the old double standard. Women claiming more sexual freedom.
Arguing that affection, not just marriage, justified sex, imitating male standards.
What drove these changes? Post-war disillusionment, women's independence, city life, cars.
All of the above, really. That eat, drink, and be merry feeling after WWI's carnage. Women working, voting, living alone more, the anonymity of cities, and yeah, the car provided privacy and freedom.
Plus, birth control becoming more discussed, available.
Margaret Sanger and others pushed it, despite being illegal lots of places. That played a big role. It all added up to more freedom for many women flapper styles, one-piece swimsuits causing shockwaves, women smoking in public, socializing differently.
But women kept organizing politically, too. The ERA fight, League of Women Voters.
Absolutely. Alice Paul and the National Women's Party pushed for the Equal Rights Amendment, though it failed then. The League of Women Voters formed. Divorce laws eased up in places. Women stayed in the workforce.
And interestingly, church membership went up in some areas, a reaction to the changes.
Seems like it. A search for stability, maybe. And you had these hugely popular national evangelists like Billy Sunday, Amy Semple McPherson.
And the soundtrack to all this?
Yes.
It just exploded as popular music. Deep roots, though.
Deep roots in African-American experience. Spirituals, blues evolving from slavery. Then minstrelsy, ragtime, which was really early jazz, the first big black music craze. Blues developing alongside it.
And New Orleans Dixieland.
That specific sound.
Yeah, that group improvisation, trumpet lead, clarinet and trombone weaving around it, rhythm section holding it down, usually upbeat.
Yeah.
And then Louis Armstrong arrives. A genius improviser, changed everything.
And the Great Migration spread jazz north. Crucial factor. As Black Americans moved north for opportunity during and after WWI, they brought jazz with them. Chicago became a huge center in the 20s, laying groundwork for the swing era. New York, too. especially Harlem.
The Harlem Renaissance. So much more than just music, right?
And
Cultural flowering.
Absolutely. A massive outpouring of Black art, literature, poetry, music based in Harlem, expressing the pain, the pride, the complexity of Black life amidst discrimination. Think Langston Hughes, Claude McKay.
And jazz figures like Duke Ellington at the Cotton Club.
Legendary.
Alongside the arts, you had political movements like Marcus Garvey's UNIA. What was his message?
Garvey, a Jamaican immigrant, preached Black pride, separatism, self-reliance. His Back to Africa movement urged Black people to build their own institutions, buy from Black businesses. He even started the Black Star steamship line.
But he ran into trouble.
His business ventures struggled, and J. Edgar Hoover targeted him, eventually convicted for mail fraud, imprisoned, deported. But his impact on Black self-confidence, Pan-Africanism, was huge, influenced groups like the Nation of Islam later.
This era also produced the lost generation of writers, disillusioned after the war.
That's the core idea. Came of age during WWI, felt alienated from American ideals. Gertrude Stein coined the term. You had figures like H.L. Mencken just savaging everything in American Mercury marriage, democracy, the middle-class boo-boysy. He also mentored young writers.
F. Scott Fitzgerald captured the mood. Gatsby.
Perfectly. This side of paradise made him famous overnight, capturing that youthful abandon, confusion, Gatsby, the glamour, the cruelty of chasing the American dream. Dreiser's American Tragedy hit similar dark notes.
Hemingway. His style was different.
Shaped by the war, lean, direct. The Sun also rises about those disillusioned expats. A Farewell to Arms, a classic war novel. His suicide later was tragic.
Sinclair Lewis, focusing on the Midwest.
Yeah, Main Street about fighting small-town conformity. Babbitt satirizing middle-class materialism, but with some affection, too.
William Faulkner digging deep into the South.
A giant of American lit. Explored Southern history, consciousness in complex novels like The Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying. Started with a bitter war novel, Soldier's Pay.
And poets. Eliot, Frost, Cummings.
Major figures.
Yeah.
Eliot's The Wasteland captured that post-war fragmentation. Frost offered complex views of New England. E. E. Cummings played with language, form. Even architecture saw Frank Lloyd Wright developing his unique style, blending buildings with nature, think the Guggenheim later on.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it's just incredible how much upheaval and tension marked the 1920s. We've hit the Red Scare anxieties, the closing doors on immigration, those huge cultural clashes like Scopes and Prohibition.
Plus the sheer dynamism of that mass consumption economy, all its social ripples, and the really profound changes in daily life, culture, art.
It makes it clear the Roaring Twenties were way more complicated than just flappers and parties. Progress, innovation, sure, but also deep anxieties, deep divisions.
Exactly, a period of massive contradiction.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Which of these forces really had the most lasting impact? How do you see echoes of the 1920s, the immigration debates, the culture wars, consumerism, changing social norms playing out even today? Definitely something to chew on. Maybe dive deeper into a figure or event that caught your ear.